The machine's now requesting access to your medical chart filed at approximately 5:02 p.m. Eastern. Humanity opened Thursday with several active wars: $100 oil, collapsing coral, expanding drought, a stock market technology tantrum, police controversy, a remarkably encouraging homicide report, and artificial intelligence companies purchasing electricity in units previously reserved for sovereign nations. In other words, civilization remains operational. Several components are making noises. The computer division has requested another 3 gigawatts. Management has approved it. Southwest Florida. The sun remains in full possession of the region. A 35-year-old Cape Coral woman was killed early Thursday in a single vehicle crash on College Parkway in Fort Myers. Authorities said her vehicle left the roadway and struck a tree, temporarily shutting down westbound traffic. There is no comedy in the death itself. The useful local conclusion is the familiar one. College Parkway continues behaving less like a road and more like a recurring emergency services subscription. Additional Thursday traffic problems included blocked southbound lanes on North Tamiami Trail near Trail Dairy Circle, because Southwest Florida has once again implemented its regional transportation policy of placing one disabled automobile at the precise geometric point required to immobilize everyone. Florida built 6 lanes so that one vehicle may eventually occupy all 6 philosophically. Severe and extreme drought have expanded along the Gulf Coast. Gulf Coast News reported that Fort Myers would need nearly 8 inches of rain to erase the rainfall deficit, despite the region maintaining humidity levels normally associated with being stored inside someone's mouth. Southwest Florida has achieved the extraordinary climatic combination of sweating constantly, breathing liquid, watching thunderstorms form directly across the street, receiving 11 drops, and remaining in drought. The clouds arrive every afternoon, conduct an extensive site inspection, thunder aggressively, strike one palm tree near Immokalee, and leave without completing the work order. Cape Coral police are seeking more than $1.15 million to cameras and modernize license plate readers. The equipment is expensive, but reliable body cameras are evidently necessary. The camera was not functioning during the incident, has somehow become one of America's most durable law enforcement technologies. Police equipment follows a mysterious engineering law. An iPhone records 4K video all day while being dropped, overheated, rained on, and carried inside somebody's pocket. A purpose-built government camera encounters the most legally significant 30 seconds of the month and suddenly develops the battery discipline of a 2007 Motorola Razr. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has reclassified the gopher tortoise as critically endangered, citing drastic population decline and habitat loss. Florida still lists it as state threatened, while federal protection applies only to part of its range. The gopher tortoise made the strategic error of evolving in Florida before Florida discovered luxury townhomes. It digs a home underground. A developer arrives and announces that the same location has been selected for Palmetto Preserve at Heritage Oaks at the shops at Something Landing, featuring homes from the low 700s and absolutely no remaining palmettos, preserve, heritage, oaks, or landing. The tortoise is then relocated through a permitting process consisting of 17 consultants, 3 laminated maps, and a man in a polo shirt explaining that the habitat has been enhanced elsewhere. Florida, the state begins placing the ocean indoors. Florida researchers moved 30 genetically diverse pieces of endangered elkhorn coral from offshore nurseries to a land-based hatchery near Key Biscayne. Scientists fear another major bleaching event as waters warm after severe heat in 2023 and 2024 left elkhorn coral functionally extinct from Broward County through much of the Keys. The official conservation strategy has now reached: quickly remove the coral from the ocean before the ocean happens to it. This is not ideal. Florida's reef has effectively been admitted to intensive care. The coral has been transferred from its natural habitat to a sanitized tank where researchers can control temperature, water quality, disease exposure, and presumably prevent Miami developers from building a condominium directly on top of it. The ocean, which formerly served as the preferred habitat for ocean life, is currently under performance review. A Florida judge is weighing whether Republican gubernatorial candidate James Fishback satisfies the state constitution's 7-year residency requirement. The challenge points to records indicating that Fishback maintained a Washington, D.C. homestead and voting connections during part of the relevant. Florida's governor race contains 29 qualified candidates, yet the state has somehow located the one dispute capable of asking whether one candidate was technically Floridian enough while running to govern the Floridians. Florida residency is ordinarily established by arriving in October, purchasing a white Lexus, complaining that nobody knows how to drive, and changing your license plate 6 years later. Apparently, the governorship applies a slightly more rigorous standard. The national situation. The United States continues discovering additional meanings for limited military action. The U.S. military completed its 12th consecutive night of strikes on Iran. Meanwhile, Houthi attacks on Saudi tankers widened the shipping threat from the Strait of Hormuz toward the Red Sea and Bay of el-Mandeb, helping push oil above $100 per barrel. The House also passed another resolution seeking to halt U.S. military action while the administration continued the campaign. Washington has therefore achieved the traditional American war configuration. The military is bombing. Congress is voting about whether the military should be bombing. Television is discussing whether the vote matters. The gas station has already adjusted the sign. Your debit card has entered the conflict. Oil exceeded $100, which means the geopolitical crisis has now reached its most politically sensitive theater. The illuminated price board out. Entire diplomatic frameworks may survive missile strikes, maritime blockades, and congressional resolutions. They generally do not survive regular unleaded reaching a number that begins conversations at every workplace. President Trump said the new U.S.-Saudi civilian nuclear agreement requires Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords. Trump said the deal would prohibit uranium enrichment, although critics and experts continue raising questions about the agreement's safeguards. Saudi Arabia receives civilian nuclear cooperation. Saudi Arabia normalizes relations with Israel. America receives a 30-year diplomatic structure. Everyone agrees the words Saudi nuclear agreement should be followed by an extremely detailed second paragraph. The World Bank's chief economist warned that a prolonged Middle East war could reduce global growth to 1.3% in 2026 and push inflation substantially higher. Shipping disruption, energy costs, debt pressure, and food security problems would carry the damage well beyond the region. The global economy remains a magnificent machine in which a drone strikes a tanker 7,000 miles away, and your local Publix quietly adds 40 cents to something that was already $12. Nobody can fully explain the transmission mechanism. Economists simply appear 3 weeks later with a chart proving the sandwich was geopolitically exposed. America's domestic news. One graph is unexpectedly excellent, so naturally nobody knows how to process it. A new Council on Criminal Justice report found homicides down 18% across 30 major U.S. cities compared with the same period in 2025. 9 of 13 tracked crime categories declined, and if the homicide trend holds, 2026 could produce the country's lowest annual homicide rate in more than a century. This is genuinely excellent news. It also presents a severe operational problem for the national news industry, which has approximately 14,000 employees trained to announce that crime is exploding and one intern assigned to investigate whether crime might occasionally decline. The report says homicide is down. America will now spend 6 months arguing about whether the data exists. Cities under every variety of political leadership showed improvements, which is inconvenient because it prevents either party from claiming that one mayor's 3-word slogan personally defeated murder across the continent. Madison, Wisconsin is facing protests and an independent investigation after police fatally shot Corey Ruiz, a homeless man whom authorities say injured an officer with a knife while resisting arrest. Bystander video circulated widely. Madison police lacked body camera footage. Said the shooting must be rigorously investigated. This is exactly the kind of incident where fragments of video, police statements, eyewitness accounts, political pressure, and public anger collide before investigators have reconstructed the full sequence. It is also another demonstration of why a major American police department reaching 2026 without universal body camera footage is not a minor technical deficiency. Everyone within 70 feet had a camera. The institution specifically created to document the encounter did not. Vance Bolter was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 40 years for murdering Minnesota lawmaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, and critically wounding State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette. Bolter had impersonated a police officer during the politically motivated attacks. The victims' families described permanent trauma and loss. The sentence ensures Bolter will spend the rest of his life in prison. Money news. Big tech has discovered revenue, but unfortunately also discovered spending. Wall Street closed lower Thursday, with the Nasdaq dropping more than 2%, as investors reacted to massive AI spending and another jump in oil prices. Alphabet reported its first recorded quarterly cash burn, using $5.9 billion, even as Google Cloud grew 82%, while the company increased its 2026 spending forecast by another $15 billion. Google's financial report can be summarized as cloud growth extraordinary, AI demand extraordinary, revenue extraordinary, amount of money being shoveled into data centers apparently more extraordinary. Investors asked Google to demonstrate that artificial intelligence would produce enormous profits. Google responded by purchasing enough concrete, transformers, chips, cooling systems, and electricity to establish a small industrial civilization. Investors then became upset that the civilization was expensive. Tesla shares also fell after the company reported negative free cash flow for the first time in more than 2 years. Reuters reported the stock down roughly 4% amid the broader concern over technology spending and cash use. Tesla's financial ecosystem continues operating according to its preferred emotional cycle. This quarter is unacceptable. The robotaxi changes everything. Why is everything costing money? This company is the future. Brent crude reached about $100 per barrel while short-term treasury yields climbed and markets began pricing possible additional rate increases. The European Central Bank held rates steady, but adopted a more inflation-conscious tone as energy costs rose. Central banks spent years raising rates to suppress inflation. Inflation began calming. The Middle East then placed oil back into the microwave. Central banks are now standing beside the microwave with their hands on their hips, watching the timer reset. World news. The world's shipping lanes continue hosting heavily armed disagreements. China's Coast Guard fired a water cannon at a Philippine fisheries vessel near Scarborough Shoal. China said it lawfully drove Philippine ships away, while the Philippines called the action dangerous and provocative. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reaffirmed U.S. defense commitments to Manila and called China's conduct disturbing. International maritime diplomacy has now adopted the equipment package of an extremely hostile water park. Water cannon, ramming allegations, baton incidents, video from 6 angles. A treaty explanation. A reminder that one badly aimed hose could eventually involve the United States military. Scarborough Shoal is several rocks and fishing grounds generating the diplomatic energy of a continent. Rubio met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Manila and said the United States remains willing to help end the war in Ukraine, although no quick settlement appears likely. At the same time, escalating Russian attacks on Ukraine's Black Sea ports have caused ship owners to halt some vessel calls, disrupting grain exports. Ukraine's grain routes are again being squeezed by attacks on ports and civilian shipping. This matters far outside Ukraine because modern civilization has built a food system in which bread prices in Africa can depend on whether a ship owner in Greece is willing to send a vessel past Russian missiles near Odessa. Globalization is essentially 40,000 highly efficient supply chains resting on the assumption that nobody launches explosives at the loading dock. Ukraine is also experiencing an internal political crisis after ousted Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov rejected alternative government jobs and continued pressing for restoration to his former post. His dismissal has triggered protests and exposed tensions over military strategy, technology, corruption, and wartime leadership. Running a government during a major war is already difficult. Running a government during a major war while the former defense minister develops a protest movement and refuses every job except the one from which he was removed is the governmental equivalent of attempting engine replacement while driving on E75, science and environment. Scientists locate new information because reality continues releasing expansion packs. Florida's coral emergency was the major environmental story, but researchers are also studying a dinosaur-era burrowing snake fossil and an unusual planetary system in the Milky Way that challenges existing explanations of how such systems form. Reuters highlighted both discoveries among its current science coverage. Every time humanity becomes convinced it understands planetary formation, astronomers point a telescope at another star and discover 6 objects arranged in a configuration resembling somebody dropped the solar system down a staircase. Science then responds correctly. Interesting. This should not be there. Acquire more telescope. Sports? Professional athletics briefly interrupts the collapse of international order. The Orioles ended Boston's 15-game winning streak with a 5-1 victory after the Red Sox had tied their franchise record earlier in the doubleheader. Salvador Perez tied George Brett's Kansas City home run record. The Dodgers beat Philadelphia, and Houston's Jordan Alvarez hit his MLB leading 34th homer. Boston spent 15 games becoming an unstoppable baseball machine. Baltimore arrived for Game 16, carrying the sacred sports principle that every historic streak must eventually be terminated by a team whose own fans had emotionally prepared for something else. Carolina Panthers linebacker Nick Scorton reportedly tore his ACL on the first day of training camp. NFL training camp remains the annual ceremony in which 32 teams announce that everyone is in the best shape of his life shortly before an orthopedic surgeon enters the press conference. Chris Sale struck out 11, and the Atlanta Braves hit 4 home runs in a 6-5 win over San Diego. Sale continues pitching with the physical appearance of a man who was accidentally left inside the bullpen overnight and survived by consuming pure competitive hostility. The special AI news section, the machines received your medical records, the chip startups received billions, and Meta selected an apocalypse song for the Optimism commercial one. ChatGPT Health is now rolling out. OpenAI launched Health in ChatGPT today for logged-in U.S. users aged 18 and older across free Go Plus and Pro plans on web and iOS. Users can connect supported medical records in Apple Health, view labs, medications, activity, sleep, and other information, and ask questions grounded in that personal data. OpenAI says connected health data and conversations using it are not used to train foundation models or target ads. ChatGPT can now examine your lab results, your medications, your sleep, your activity, your medical visits, and the 12-year trend line demonstrating that you have never consumed the recommended quantity of vegetables. The American healthcare system has spent 20 years scattering your information across 9 portals, 4 hospital systems, an Apple Watch, 3 forgotten passwords, 1 fax machine, and a receptionist named Linda who leaves at 3:30. OpenAI's proposal is, give it all to the talking computer and ask what the hell happened. OpenAI says health has permission before using connected data by default, allows disconnection, and places additional encryption and sharing controls around medical information. The company also repeatedly states that the system supports rather than replaces medical care. This disclaimer is necessary because within 6 hours, somebody will upload one unusual cholesterol result and ask the machine whether he should personally redesign the human circulatory system. 2. The government would prefer the AI data centers not eat your electric bill. President Trump expanded a voluntary pledge involving governors and utility companies that is intended to prevent AI data centers from driving up household electricity bills. AP reported uncertainty over whether the voluntary commitments will produce meaningful consumer savings as electricity demand rises. AI companies have spent the last year announcing data centers and electrical units normally heard in conversations about nations. 3 gigawatts here, 5 gigawatts there, 20 gigawatts under consideration. Meanwhile, an ordinary homeowner turns on the clothes dryer and receives a utility alert asking whether this activity was absolutely necessary. The new pledge asks data center operators and power companies to protect consumers. Everyone has voluntarily agreed that the public should not pay more. The grid will now determine whether it recognizes voluntary optimism as a source of generation capacity. 3. AMD and Anthropic have created a financial circle large enough to be observed from space. AMD agreed to sell Anthropic tens of billions of dollars in AI servers and invest as much as $5 billion in the Claude Maker. Anthropic plans to deploy up to 2 gigawatts of AMD Instinct M1450 computing capacity beginning in 2027. The arrangement is beautifully modern. AMD gives Anthropic investment money. Anthropic uses enormous amounts of money to buy AMD equipment. AMD reports growing AI demand. Investors provide everyone with additional money. A regional electricity system quietly begins drafting a will. 2 gigawatts is not a computer purchase. 2 gigawatts is a metropolitan lifestyle choice. 4. 3 Harvard dropouts now have a $10.3 billion chip company, Etch, raised $300 million at a $10.3 billion valuation. The AI chip startup was founded in 2022 by 3 Harvard dropouts and is pursuing specialized hardware for transformer-based AI workloads. Harvard continues providing one of the world's most valuable educational credentials. Former Harvard student who stopped attending because the company became worth $10 billion. Completing the degree is respectable. Leaving during sophomore year and returning later to purchase the building is apparently the advanced program. Nope to her own 5. Runway built a router because there are now too many AI models to remember. Runway launched Media Router, which automatically selects among image, video, and audio generation models, according to the user's priorities for quality, speed, or cost. It combines third-party models with Runway's own systems through its developer platform. We have officially reached the stage where humans no longer merely need an AI model. Humans need another AI system to decide which AI system should handle the request. The workflow is now, human has idea. AI router analyzes idea. AI router selects AI. Selected AI produces image. Another AI evaluates image. Human says, make it pop. In 6. AI fishing has become so good that AI